Hello and welcome to The Green Stream, a podcast brought to you by Sustainable Business Network Detroit, a network of partnerships between Southeast Michigan stakeholders, innovators, and changemakers. Each partner is on a mission to advance and amplify sustainable business practices, and we're here to learn from, share, and help activate a sustainable way forward for Greater Detroit. If you enjoyed today's episode, please like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Leave us a review and join the conversation on LinkedIn, Facebook, X, YouTube, and Blue Sky. And head over to our website, sbn-detroit.org. Now, let's listen in to our conversation with today's sustainability leaders.
Well, hello and welcome to the Green Stream. I'm Terry Barclay. I'm the president and CEO of Inforum, and I chair the Sustainable Business Network of Detroit. And we have truly a very special guest with us today on the podcast. Someone, John, I was trying to figure out before we went live how long we've known each other. I think it's too long for us to say, actually.
Yeah, we shouldn't admit that.
Yeah, we shouldn't admit that. But we have John McElroy with us today, who is absolutely at the epicenter of the automotive industry, one of the most influential and interesting thought leaders and analysts in the industry. He's been at this a while. He's the creator of Autoline Daily, the first industry webcast of industry news and analysis. He also, of course, hosts the Emmy Award-winning television program Autoline This Week and co-hosts Autoline After Hours. And I think you do 2 or 3 radio spots a day, John, on WWJ. You're just absolutely everywhere. I know you do blogs, you do op-eds for Ward's, Auto World. And John has just always been one of those provocative, honest, knowledgeable, and refreshing thinkers in the industry who isn't afraid to tackle topics that sometimes are off limits. So we really appreciate having you with us.
Well, thanks for all that, Terry, but be careful there. You're setting me up to be grander than I am.
No. We'll do that. But I do want to ask you a couple of, more personal questions. We have known each other for a long time, but how did you get into all these gigs you have? Like, what's your story of how you got involved in this?
Well, I'll give you the very brief one because we could do the whole show on this. But, I got out of college. I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I knew I was a good writer. And they always teach you in any writing class, write about what you know. So I thought I should write about cars because I'm just a total gearhead. But as I started to get into learning more about the auto industry, I found out that the industry is actually more interesting than the cars. And that's the career path I took. I'm still a gearhead. I love the vehicles, but the people and the processes behind how this all comes together has just been, it's taken my whole career to try to peel back each layer of the onion. And just when I'm ready to pat myself on the back and thinking I've got it figured out, I discover something completely else different that shows I don't know anything.
Dagnabbit, isn't that how life works? It's really true. But you're so right. I'm not a native of Michigan. I moved here to go to grad school at U of M. I grew up all over the country. And I remember coming here, and the more that I learned about this industry, just the more blown away I was by the smart people, the technology, the complexity of it, just the ever-evolving nature of it. So it's worthy of that kind of attention, I think, and the depth that you talk about. So, but at the Sustainable Business Network of Detroit, we are, of course, interested in all things sustainability. And it's been interesting to watch the arc of adoption of electric vehicles that was in many ways policy driven. And maybe we can get into a little bit of that today as the policy winds have shifted somewhat. But what in your experience first interested you or connected you, because you've talked about this, about sustainability in the industry?
Sure. I mean, there was really one pivotal moment. I got to hear of a guy named Bill McDonough. Bill is an architect, but he's also an avowed environmentalist. But he's the only environmentalist I ever ran into who recognized the need for heavy industry for society. But he came at it with a different, mindset, saying that what we really need is a totally circular economy, and especially in heavy industry. So that he recognized heavy industry has got to get into a lot of nasty stuff that isn't necessarily good for the environment, but is needed for society. But he said we need to contain it, and we need to have a completely circular economy within heavy industry, so that once we introduce bad chemicals and minerals and things like that, we keep it in there and just keep reusing it. And Bill came up with what I thought was one of the greatest ways of describing it. He said, we're not talking about cradle to grave, because he said, what's the grave? The grave is the landfill. And that's been our mindset. Oh, we'll just throw it away. Well, Bill said, after decades of throwing things away, we found out there is no away. Away went away. You just can't throw things away. That doesn't exist anymore. They're not away. They seep into the soil. They seep into the water. They pollute the air. And so he came up with this idea of not cradle to grave, but cradle to cradle. Things just keep turning over and over again, contained in this industrial system. And that really changed my thinking as to how industry, in my particular case, the auto industry, could actually become very sustainable.
So talk about that some more, because I think that, it goes through cycles of levels of interest in this particular aspect. Do you think, does sustainability still matter in the mobility industry, given the shifts? I think we've tended to think about it in terms of EVs. And as you are pointing out, it's so much more than that. So where are we on that continuum? Does it still matter? Is it going to matter more? What are the trends?
Well, yeah, absolutely. Sustainability is still critically important in mobility, because that's the only way. I mean, it sounds redundant and trite almost, but that's the way that it's going to be sustained. So, yeah, I mean, the auto industry offers a lot of things to society, which is why it's still around today. And that happens to be personal mobility. But there's downsides to it as well. The pollution that cars emit, or the processes to make those vehicles, down to automotive safety. I mean, just in the United States alone, we're at a point where 40,000 people are killed every year in motor vehicle accidents, and close to 3 to 4 million are injured badly enough to have to go to the hospital. So these are things that still need to be worked on. And so if you ask me if it's still important, absolutely it is.
What are some of the promising trends that you're seeing?
Well,
especially in technology?
Sure. I mean, there's so many to talk about. I mean, you brought up electric vehicles. The problem with piston powered vehicles is not the internal combustion engine. It's essentially the pollutants that are in the fuel that they burn. If we could wave a magic wand and all of a sudden have gasoline or diesel fuel that did not have carbon locked into it, they would actually be fairly viable. And there are those who are working on what they call drop-in fuels that have essentially either no carbon in them or are carbon neutral in their life cycle. But there's been a lot of focus on EVs, and I'm actually quite bullish on EVs. Not so much in the United States at this snapshot in time, but I like to say that the internal combustion engine is this wonderful 19th century invention that has pretty much run its course. It's not going to get more efficient. And I say that because, in Formula One racing, which is the epitome of motor racing, the engines there cost $10 million a piece. They throw every known technology at them, and they're still only 50% efficient, i.e., the energy trapped in a gallon of gasoline, they only get to use 50% of it. The rest goes out as emissions and heat. So if the best engineering minds in the world with essentially cost is no object and available technology is thrown at it, can only get to be 50% efficient, that tells me the internal combustion engine has run its course. And that's where electric starts to look really attractive. It's far more efficient. Now, EVs are not zero emissions. Sure, they do not have a tailpipe, but they cause a lot of emissions in the process of mining all the materials needed to make the batteries and the electric motors and whatnot. Even so, if you go to, Bill McDonough's adage of cradle to cradle total life cycle, an EV emits about half the pollution of an internal combustion vehicle. So that's very promising. The ability to get rid of half of it. Now we still got to press and figure out how do we get rid of all of it, or get it to absolutely being neutral. And so there are other things that are coming along. Artificial intelligence is starting to figure out how to make the manufacturing process far more efficient than it is right now, as just one example.
That's amazing. I'm glad to hear your comments about EVs. We've all had experiences in other countries, in other places in the world where the pace seems to be increasing rather than decreasing. Quick story, I just got back from a wonderful trip to Churchill, Manitoba to go look at the polar bears. And, we got on one of those very large tundra buggies, where the wheels alone are taller than I am. Of course, I'm short, so that doesn't mean a lot.
They're still big tires.
They're still big tires. They're still big tires. And those were EVs. They had, made the conversion there. And, we were out all day on that thing, so I was thinking in the back of my head about range anxiety as it related to the tundra buggy. But, it was a perfect application, and it worked so very well, so we are not at the end of that trend, I don't think.
Oh, no. Here's another thing to think of. EVs keep getting more efficient and the cost comes down. We're figuring out how to make batteries less expensive, how to make the electric motors more efficient and the total vehicle more efficient. Meanwhile, internal combustion engines are not getting much more efficient than they are. The cost is definitely not coming down. And so we're fast approaching the crossover point where electric vehicles are going to be cheaper to manufacture, and they already are cheaper to operate, but cheaper to manufacture as well. And, we've had well over 100 years, 125 years of development in the internal combustion engine. Give the electric battery and the electric motor a little bit more time. I think we're going to be astonished at how small and light the batteries are going to be able to come. And range anxiety, in another decade, we'll laugh at the thought that we were worried about range.
Yeah. I like that. So, John, the level of change, though, and the pace of change is really stunning. As you said, it's a little hard to wrap our minds around sometimes. And you've talked a little bit in the past. Do you see radical collaboration amongst the manufacturers as something that will help drive this change and make it sustainable?
I don't know if I'd call it radical collaboration, but collaboration. Without a doubt. The new technology that we're talking about, especially EVs, is extremely expensive to invest in. So all the legacy automakers like a General Motors or a Ford or Stellantis or Toyota or Mercedes or anyone that you want to mention have invested tens of billions of dollars in this technology. And they're losing billions of dollars on it right now. And, when you look at the EV startups, Tesla is the only one that is profitable. Its profits are actually dropping right now. So that's forcing automakers to say, look, why don't we get together on this project and split the cost? And you're going to see a lot more of that. We may even see consolidation where one automaker absorbs another, but definitely on a project basis, they're going to be searching out other players where they can split the cost. And And that's going to be global. And we're already seeing it in action, and we'll continue to see that accelerate.
Here's a question that I'm dying to ask you. If you were going to advise someone starting a business in the mobility space who was interested in pursuing a sustainability approach, what would you advise?
Focus on the customer. Repeat that 3 times. Focus on the customer, really figure out what you're trying to do for those people. How many are there? What are they really going to pay you? I've seen too many companies get into the automotive space with a cool idea for a car, a new cool idea for a technology, and it really doesn't go anywhere. It takes forever to get it developed because they haven't figured out who the key customer is, how many of those people there are, and what kind of money that they can pay for the service or the product. And so you got to take a really cold, hard-nosed look at what kind of revenue might you be able to generate. And then you got to figure out, can I organize a company around that kind of revenue and still make a profit?
Do you have any handicaps you want to pass out? Like any places, particular technologies or systems that you'd focus on first? I
Well,
know that's not really a fair question, but I want to ask it
yeah,
anyway.
yeah. No. It is a fair question. So, um, you know, the cost of owning an automobile is horrendous right now. I mean, it is a massive expense. The industry is going through an affordability crisis. I'm actually very bullish on autonomous cars.
Mm.
I think they will be the game changer in the future,
Mm.
where the technology will be there, not this decade, but we're getting very, very close to it. Well, you'll be able to get into a vehicle, tell it where you want to go, and do whatever you want while the vehicle takes you there. And that's going to open up society to much more mobility. So the very old, the very young, anybody with disability will be able to have their own personal mobility. And then once you know that you can whip out your smartphone or whatever we use in the future and have an app that you know for a fact that within 5 minutes, the vehicle you want is going to be at your doorstep. And if you're going to the beach, it will be able to accommodate that. If you're taking your mountain bike or your dog, or it will accommodate, it will provide you with whatever kind of vehicle that you need. And so you will only pay for your mobility as you need it. Instead of buying a car, driving it maybe 5% of the time, most vehicles spend 95% of their life parked, depreciating in value. And so people will come to the realization that, you know what? I don't really need to own a vehicle anymore. I'll just pay for my mobility on an as needed basis. And for the average household, they'll save thousands of dollars going this route. And I think that once most households realize, oh my gosh, we can save $3,000 to $5,000 a year on our mobility, boom, they'll go for it. There'll be others who say, no, thank you very much. I can afford to have my own vehicle, although it will become autonomous too. But Terry, these vehicles, they don't get tired. They don't get drunk or high. And so we'll see a dramatic reduction in accidents. I mentioned before the number who were killed, but I also mentioned the 3 to 4 million who are injured badly enough to go to the hospital. Imagine the impact on the American healthcare or the global healthcare, but I'll use the US for right now. Mm-hmm. Imagine the impact on the American healthcare system if we stop sending 3 to 4 million people to hospitals every year.
Wow. See, I never thought of it that way. That's a great connection to make.
And it goes beyond. So, when the first horseless carriages appeared 120 years ago, there were very few paved roads. There was nothing. Parking lots, the concept didn't even exist. Parking structures didn't exist. All the stop signs and stoplights and everything. That the horseless carriage changed the American landscape. Mm-hmm. I believe autonomous cars will have an equal impact on the American landscape, because once we are able to operate with far fewer vehicles, I mean, you drive through most neighborhoods, there's cars in the driveway, there's cars in the street. Those will be gone. If you drive through any city, every square inch of the curbs are lined with cars. Those will be gone. We're going to start to open up things a lot. You drive by any major mall today, they have acres and acres and acres of parking lot that are largely empty, except for Thanksgiving to Christmas time when they're jam-packed and otherwise are not.
And oh, by the way, they're disasters from a sustainability standpoint. There's been a lot about green infrastructure and, they're impervious, the whole bit. So
Right,
there's a
right.
gain there.
So I see autonomy as the answer to all of this. Far less pollution, far less congestion, a changed landscape. I mean, think of it on a personal level. If you've got a garage with, two-car garage, which is very typical of any American home, and you decide you no longer need to own a vehicle, well, you just probably added a 600 or 800 square foot addition to your home.
Yeah.
So I think people will love that idea.
Okay, so not this decade, but when?
That's a good question. I mean, look, I think we're going to start to see retail autonomous vehicles. In fact, there's a Silicon Valley startup that's coming out this year that it wants to start retailing them. I think they're going to be very expensive. But I think in the middle of the next decade, we're going to start to see more retail. I mean, autonomous cars sitting in the showroom that you and I can go buy. And then it's going to take several more decades for everything that I've talked about to start to wind out. But by the middle of the century, I think we're going to see a dramatic difference.
Wow. Wow. That would be really, really cool. What a picture you paint of that. That's really very helpful. I think that it's been such an abstract, nebulous idea. Are there policy levers that you see, not just in the United States, but globally? Are there ways that policymakers can help support the future change that's needed?
That's a great question. I think we've seen lately that subsidies are not the way to do it.
Okay.
Because subsidies can be here today and gone tomorrow, as we've seen in the EV segment in the United States. But policies that engender or encourage certain actions, and I don't have any good examples off the top of my head right now. But one thing would be, as an example, in the United States right now, there really are no regulations regarding autonomous vehicles.
Yeah.
There is no quote unquote driving test that an autonomous vehicle has to go through. And we really don't want municipalities, counties, or states trying to come up with this. We need a national one. And this is where a national policy, when it comes to autonomy, would be really good. And I wouldn't leave it in the hands of politicians either. You need professional societies like the Society of Automotive Engineers, where it's going to get the best groups of, the best minds together to figure out what the way forward is. And that can also be a pretty slow process. But those are the kinds of policies I'd like to see the country developing to encourage this move to autonomy and not have to rely on taxpayer subsidies to try to get things going.
Makes a huge amount of sense. I'm just kind of curious, are there other parts of the world that are ahead of us in thinking about this, or are we all just at this beginning stage?
Look, it's a race right now between the United States and China. This is where the technology is being developed. I would add another development, what they call VTOLs, or vertical takeoff and landing craft. You would call them drones. That's what although if you talk to the VTOL people, do not call them drones. They don't like that term at all. But we're talking about passenger drones, electric and autonomous. And so in high density areas that have horrific traffic problems, these things make a lot of sense. So I think we're going to see a new mode of transportation going into the air that will also be combined with mass transportation and automobiles and things like that. But yeah, I think we're at the very beginnings of a mobility revolution. And whether it's little electric scooters, whether it's last mile delivery, whether it's these VTOLs, electric vehicles, autonomous ones, in just a couple of decades, the landscape's going to be very different.
Wow. So that actually is a good tee up, as was your earlier comment about focusing on the customers. We like to ask our guests what practical steps they can recommend to our audience to contribute to a sustainable business practices. So what advice would you give in
Um,
this field?
yeah, I mean, this is my advice, and maybe it's more advice to myself than to anyone else. But as I said before, focus on the customer, focus relentlessly, really figure out how many people would be willing to buy your product. Really, I mean, you can do focus groups, you can do surveys. People will often tell you what they think you want to hear. So you got to be very careful in really determining what the market is out there. Start small. You know, uh, I like quoting this guy named Larry Burns, who used to run GM's R&D operations. Think small, or I mean, start small, think big, move fast. So don't spend a fortune trying to get things off the ground. Figure out how you can get started as cheaply as possible. Recognize that you'll come up with a bunch of ideas, you'll talk to a bunch of people, but once you throw your idea out into the marketplace, you might get slapped in the face. Be ready to deal with that and pivot and turn and figure out what's the next step to make things work.
Great advice, John, as always. I learn whenever I talk to you. Thank you so much for being here with us today on the Green Stream and for giving us the benefit of the years of study and experience that you've had in this field. We're really very lucky to have you.
Well, thanks, Terry. That's very kind of you to say so. And I really liked this conversation because obviously you've tapped into one of my hot points that I love to talk about. And so thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you for tuning in to the Sustainable Business Network Detroit, the Green Stream podcast. Remember to like, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Make sure to follow us on sbn-detroit.org and stay tuned for more conversations on sustainability from inside and around the city.